Okay, so this morning I'm browsing through Facebook and I see a reminder. My wife's name, which I'm going to leave off of this platform, and myself, married. I said like March 10th, 2010 or something like that, but that's because I was slow to move over to Facebook because, to be honest, I still prefer the old MySpace. I don't know why we ever decided that Facebook was better. Anyway, we actually got married August 10th, 2007. In 16 years, I never forgot an anniversary. Not one. Anyway, I looked at that reminder and all I could think is, wow, what a waste of 16 years. If we could have just worked together for the same goal, which is the health of our relationship, it could have been an absolutely amazing relationship. Sorry, we got bugs. I'm still trying to wrap my head around why things went like they did. And yeah, I wasn't perfect, but it seemed like we were just living two different lives. She kept asking me to change. That was my first mistake, was changing. Every time she expressed dissatisfaction, I changed whatever she was dissatisfied with. And I learned in the end that I wasn't the one she was dissatisfied with. She was. She was projecting it onto me. Yeah, I know there would be plenty of people out there like, oh, well, you cheated on her, so whatever. Fill in the blank. There were times I didn't cheat on her. Plenty of times. And before the first time I cheated on her, I didn't even want to look at another woman. Didn't want to think about another woman. She was the only woman I wanted. There were reasons that my mind went the wrong direction. And after this divorce is finalized, I'll be putting all that on YouTube. Every mistake I made, every mistake she made in our relationship. And I'm doing that so everybody knows everything that happened and no more questions can be asked. I got a lot of people out there right now trying to convince me that she's 100% victim, I'm 100% villain. Even to the point of accusing me of abusing her. Which, again, I do admit that there were some behaviors I exhibited that were abusive. Certainly not something I'm happy with or proud of. A lot of it really was reactive. Which, read into that whatever you want. But I had a whole lot of emotional dysregulation issues that I didn't actually realize were tied to a couple of conditions that I have. One of which I knew I already had. The other one I just discovered recently. And I think if I had known more about it then, I could have controlled myself a little better. Looked at my behaviors objectively. But I didn't. I didn't know what I know now. Now, of course, the older you get, the more you say, I really wish I would have known then what I know now. Things would have been better. But that's pointless. Because you can't go back. You cannot undo what you've done. You can only just not do it anymore. I finally came to that point where I'm like, okay, well, these are the things that I need to fix and stop doing. I asked for an opportunity to show her that I have improved myself again. That these particular behaviors are no longer going to be exhibited by me because I am dissatisfied with those behaviors. She didn't care. In fact, I have to say this with a great deal of dissatisfaction. Every ounce of civility I've tried to express since we separated on January 6th has been met with extreme, nearly violent hostility. And that is ultimately what made the decision for me not to go back. It would take an act of God. Of course, at the same time, it would take an act of God for her to ask me back. A lot of people will say, well, it's because you did so horribly. I changed almost every single aspect of my being to satisfy her. And in the end, all it did was rob me of myself. And the crazy thing is, all the things that she demanded I change were the things that she loved when we got together. If you're a woman, or inversely, if you're a man and if you're a woman and have a man, whatever. Okay, if your significant other asks you to change toxic behaviors, do it. But if you ask the same thing of them and they say no, or I don't have anything to change, or I'm not toxic, leave. Don't play games with it. Because the moment they tell you they're not going to change what they demanded you change, they're showing themselves to, at the very least, be narcissistic, even if they're not actually a narcissist. And yeah, I know narcissist is a word that's thrown around a lot, and a lot of that is really just to invalidate their perspective or to justify yours. Whatever. If it makes you feel better, sure, fine. But be very, very careful, because you actually might be the narcissist yourself if you want to go that far. But I changed every aspect of myself to make her happy. It went beyond just changing toxic behaviors. I had to change hobbies, friends, family, jobs, habits, interests. I had to change everything. I waited for 16 years for her to do the same thing. She demanded at one point that I make full disclosure on a public platform of everything I did wrong before our relationship and after. You watch my earlier videos, you'll see it. There is more that I haven't said. Most of that is because I'm actually still in the middle of divorce proceedings. I really don't want to hurt my chances of at least getting to see my kids. Because she's never going to admit to anything she's done wrong. Which brings me to the next part. After I made that disclosure, I submitted the challenge to her. A challenge she didn't even acknowledge. She didn't even say, no, I'm not going to do that. She just didn't acknowledge it. In our 16 years together, the only things that she changed were the things that I told her, please don't change. Those were the things she changed. If you tell somebody that you expect something from them, but you yourself aren't willing to do the same thing, or at least go to the same lengths, that behavior is abusive. Yeah, sure, you may not be punching them or throwing them across the room. It's abusive nonetheless. It really messes with the mind. It got me to a place where even minor inconveniences became catastrophic, world-ending events in my mind. I used to not be like that. Sure, if I got mad enough at a video game, I'd probably throw a controller. I did that for a while, and then one day I grew out of it. Realized how stupid I was being. It's better to just turn the game off, let it rest for a little while. Go back when you're calm. If it happens again, turn it off again. Go back later. Took me a long time to learn that. Anyway. I went from being able to look at a situation objectively and say, okay, this isn't really worth getting mad about, to being completely incapable of controlling my temper, my frustration at minor inconveniences. That is what can happen to a person when the person who's closest to them demands things that they don't reciprocate. Gives you just enough love and affection not to leave, but not near enough to be satisfied. And anytime you do something, even if it's indirect, that gives them a negative perception or affects them negatively in any way, even just minor, they withdraw or withhold affection, punishing you for not being perfect. Those are all abuse, and they will mess your head up. Whenever their demands are so extreme that some of them nearly kill you. But can't even give you the affection that you need to feel loved in your relationship. That's abuse. And it will mess your head up. The craziest thing in the little more than 2 months that we've been apart, my ability to regulate my emotions and look at events objectively has greatly improved. To the point where I can look at those minor inconveniences and say, okay, well, I'll just work past that. I'll work around it if I have to. I'll ignore it and come back to it later if I need. I've gotten to the point, again, where I can play a video game. If it starts frustrating me, I'm like, okay, I'll come back to it later. I'll go do something more constructive, more productive. Stuff I used to do before we got together. I'm not happier now, but I'm more controlled now. I am actually able to look at negative input objectively. So borderline personality disorder and ADHD both have this rejection sensitive dysphoria. I don't know how many people actually know what that is, but rejection sensitive dysphoria is basically where if somebody gives you any negative input at all, and it doesn't even have to be intended as negative, just saying, those shoes don't really say you. That is devastating to somebody with RSD, which is a comorbidity of both BPD and ADHD. And it makes us feel like they're saying we are too ugly or stupid to love. Yeah, okay, for normal people, they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, yeah, that's because you don't have it. RSD is not something we decide. It's not our ego saying, oh, look at that. They're saying you're less than you think you are. No. It's because growing up, we were so traumatized by excessive negative input, our brains were reprogrammed to see it as a threat. Not a threat to our ego, but literally a threat to our well-being, our lives. Oddly enough, for the most part, ego doesn't really come into it. We're not worried so much about how people perceive us as we are the effect of being perceived negatively. Because when you want to be loved and someone shows you you're not, even if it's just perceived, you feel unlovable. I think that was the first time my mom heard that. I was sitting on the hood of my truck with a gun in my hand. First thing I said to them, why am I so unlovable? This is about 1.5 years ago. It was the last time I ever put a gun to my head. To think I got in such a place that I wanted to do that. To be honest, I still think about it every day. To end it. And no, I don't need a gun to do that. Thousands of ways to end a person's life, and a gun is just the most convenient. Anyway, before I got married, the thought of doing that never even entered my mind. I even asked, why in the world would somebody do that? In the end, it's self-hatred. I was convinced that I was not worth loving or living. Whether somebody else convinced me or I convinced myself is irrelevant. If you've gotten yourself to the point where ending your own life seems like the best option, going to therapy does help. But get out of the situation you're in and put yourself in a more peaceful situation. I don't care if you have to move from whatever city you're living in to a place out in the country. Wherever you're at is toxic. You need to get out of it. Again, I still think about it every day. There are thousands of different options for me to do it. But I have to keep reminding myself of the obligations. So, my hope is that one day that obligation to live will eventually become a desire to live. It looks like it's going to be another long video. Anyway, I think about it often. What a waste of 16 years. And I can't say it was completely wasted. There were good times. But it really is hard to see the good times through the bad times. Especially knowing those good times will never happen again. Whether it was a trauma bond or not, I loved her. I wouldn't have sacrificed so much for her if I didn't. I almost died several times, sacrificing too much. All of this is a story that my children will probably one day hear. Regardless of whether I'm able to be in their lives the rest of their childhood or not. One day, when they come of age, I'll tell them the truth. And they'll get to see what their father really went through. And it won't be the self-glorifying things that they may be hearing from other people. Because I'll tell you this, somebody who's not willing to take accountability for the things that they do wrong, that's somebody who's not willing to tell the truth about the other person either. I'm trying to get my phone situated. I don't really use selfie sticks. They feel weird. Makes me feel like a 15-year-old girl in the mall going like, forget you just saw that. Anyway, like I said, I'm not really happier. I'm actually not even more content. But I'm more stable. If you leave a situation and become more emotionally stable, it is extremely likely that you are not the problem. That doesn't mean you weren't part of the problem, okay? I have to make sure that people understand that. I did a lot of things wrong. Outside of cheating, I did a lot of things wrong in our relationship. I attribute most of that to my reactions to her behaviors and expectations. I know that sounds like I'm just not taking accountability, but I said most of it. Honestly, I can attribute a lot of it to my own expectations and even my own insecurities, fears of abandonment and being unloved, unwanted. Those are things I actually expressed to her. She kept saying that she loved me. She actually wanted me, attracted to me and all this stuff, but I had to keep questioning it because how can you love somebody if you won't show them affection? How can you want somebody if you don't try to take hold of them? How can you say you find somebody attractive if you're always pushing them away? Doesn't make sense. We could have had an absolutely amazing life together. And all it would have taken was both of us vying for the same thing and reciprocating each other's needs and affection. That's it. Super simple. Just like, and at the risk of sounding accusatory, just like Chris Rock said, relationships aren't hard. They're only hard when only one person is working on it. I can't diminish her contribution to the relationship. But her contributions came in the form of expressing financial and material expectations. And she did actually sacrifice a lot of her time for the kids and for businesses I tried to start up that unfortunately failed. I actually had a moving business at one time, and I never could figure out how to get it to grow. And before anybody tries to accuse me of, oh, that's what narcissists do. They waste the family resources on starting a new business, blah, blah, blah. In 2015, November 26, 2015, I remember that date very well because it was a turning point in my family's history, my household's history. I started working part-time at a place called River Run. It's an ATV park in East Texas. Just to supplement income. After 2.5 years of working there, I was full-time, making more money than I've ever made in my life. After 6.5 years of working there, I eventually quit. Not because the job wasn't good. Not because I hated my boss or I didn't like my pay or anything like that. I was still making good money. But because I had to make a choice between my job and the safety of my children. And not even because the job was dangerous for my kids, but because my wife and I both ended up working there. And that actually led to an event where all 4 of my children were placed in grave danger. They all suffered for it. 2 of them more than the other 2, and 1 of them more than all the rest. I don't want to go into too much detail on that because I have to ask my kids' permission before I actually divulge that information. But we were left in a position where we had to bring our kids to work. And all the people who know the situation, they're like, well, your kids were homeschooled, which they were at the time. Why didn't you just put them in public school? Well, we worked weekends and didn't do anything. Well, okay, well, what about a babysitter? Okay, then what's the second income for? We'd be paying that second income to somebody else. This is why whenever we first got together, I told my wife, for the sake of the children, when we have children, if one of us works, the other one doesn't. At the end of it all, I was vilified for holding to that. It was a boundary that she was, I'll say, reluctant to keep. A boundary I set. And there were several times where she just didn't honor it at all. There actually wasn't one single boundary I set in our relationship that she actually that she respected. Anyway, so one day our boss says, now keep in mind, we weren't the only ones there with kids. We also weren't the only ones that brought our kids to work. But we were the only ones that were told our kids couldn't come with us anymore, except for one day of the week. My mother-in-law, her mom, refused to help. She told us that she wouldn't help. That's actually why we ended up leaving them with the person we did that did horrible things. That ended up being a mistake. And I was left with a choice. Keep my job or take care of my kids. So we quit. The whole relationship went down from there. I was accused of never having worked through our relationship. I mean, there are people who are believing that right now. I could write a list of jobs that I had. Some of them paid well, some of them paid like crap, some of them almost killed me. Car passing, give me a moment. So the fact that she's trying to convince people that I refused to work while we were together is not only insulting, it's actually rather infuriating. I still carry a lot of those scars and pains and aches. One of us works, the other one doesn't. That was for the safety of the kids and the management of the household. I had one guy, he was a troll, but he said, well, you know, in this day and age, it takes a 2-income household. Well, it didn't. When I was working, just me, we had more than enough. We were living within our means. We had more than enough. But for a person who always wants more, enough will never be enough. Anyway, I know I've rambled on too long about the past, but this has been one of the hardest things for me to work through. It could have been absolutely amazing if we were both trying for the other person instead of just ourselves. Anyway, hopefully this helps you. Hopefully it helps me. And take this information I've given you. Listen to the toxic things that I did, the toxic things that she did, and just not do them. And eventually you'll be better.